One of the hardest parts of trusting God's timing is letting go of our fear of missed opportunities. We worry that if something doesn't happen now, it never will. But in Jeremiah 29:11, God reassures us, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Trusting His timing means believing that what is meant for you will not pass you by and that His plans are always good. This trust also transforms how we view delays. Instead of seeing them as denials, we begin to see them as divine pauses. In Exodus 13:17-18, when God leads the Israelites out of Egypt, He takes them on a longer route to avoid conflict with the Philistines, saying if they swore, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. The longer path was not a setback but a safeguard, ensuring that the Israelites were ready for the journey ahead. Similarly, God's timing protects and prepares us even when it feels slow. Finally, trusting God's timing fills us with peace. Philippians 4:6-7 encourages us, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." When we trust His timing, we release the anxiety of trying to force outcomes and rest in the assurance that He is in control. To trust God's timing is to acknowledge that He is the author of time itself. It is an act of surrender that opens the door for Him to work in ways far beyond what we could ask or imagine. His timing is perfect, His plans are good, and His promises are sure. Trust Him in the waiting, for He is never late. Recognizing God's hand in your life is a profound act of faith. It's about seeing beyond the surface of circumstances and understanding that every moment, whether joyful or painful, is part of a divine plan. Too often we rush through life, caught up in the chaos of our own plans and desires, and miss the fingerprints of God on our journey. Yet His hand is always there, guiding, protecting, and orchestrating events for our good and His glory. One of the greatest challenges in recognizing God's hand is that His work often doesn't look like what we expect. We want grand, unmistakable signs, but God often works in subtle, quiet ways. In 1 Kings 19:11-12, the prophet Elijah experiences this truth. Fleeing for his life, Elijah expects to encounter God in dramatic displays of power: a windstorm, an earthquake, a fire. But God is not in any of these. Instead, He speaks in a gentle whisper. This story reminds us that God's hand is not always seen in the extraordinary, but often in the quiet, everyday moments of our lives. Recognizing His hand requires us to slow down and pay attention. Psalm 46:10 calls us to be still and know that I am God. In our hurried lives, stillness can feel unnatural, but it is in the quiet that we begin to notice the divine thread running through our story, the blessings we take for granted, the people who cross our path, the opportunities that seem to come out of nowhere. These are not coincidences. They are evidence of God's hand at work. Consider the story of Joseph. In Genesis, Joseph's life is filled with hardships, betrayal, slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment. From the outside, it might seem as though God's hand was absent. Yet at every turn, God was positioning Joseph for a greater purpose. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph reflects on his journey and tells his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Recognizing God's hand often requires hindsight, the ability to look back and see how every step, even the painful ones, led to His purpose. One of the ways to recognize His hand is through the blessings that come disguised as challenges. In Romans 8:28, we are assured, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. This doesn't mean that every experience will be easy or enjoyable, but it does mean that every experience can be used for good. The closed doors, the detours, the seasons of waiting, these are not random. They are God's way of redirecting us towards something better. Recognizing His hand also requires a heart of gratitude. When we practice gratitude, we begin to see God's presence in even the smallest details of our lives. In 1 Thessalonians 5:18, Paul instructs us to give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Gratitude shifts our perspective, helping us to focus not on what we lack, but on the countless ways God has provided for us. It's in this posture of thankfulness that we become more attuned to His presence. Another way to recognize His hand is through the relationships He places in our lives. Think of Ruth and Naomi in the book of Ruth. After suffering great loss, Ruth chooses to stay with Naomi, declaring, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Ruth 1:16. This bond, orchestrated by God, leads Ruth to Boaz, her future husband, and ultimately places her in the lineage of Christ. The people who support, challenge, and encourage us are often instruments of God's grace, reminders of His hand at work. Recognizing God's hand also involves trusting in His sovereignty. There will be times when life feels chaotic and out of control, but even then, God is working behind the scenes. In Jeremiah 29:11, God declares, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Trusting this promise allows us to recognize that even in uncertainty, God is in control, weaving every thread of our lives into His masterpiece. Sometimes recognizing His hand requires us to let go of our expectations. We may have a picture of what our lives should look like, but God's plans are often far greater than our own. In Ephesians 3:20, we are reminded that God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. When we release our need for control and allow God to work, we begin to see His hand in ways that surpass our understanding. Lastly, recognizing His hand fills us with hope. When we see how He has worked in our past, it gives us confidence for the future. In Psalm 121:2, the psalmist declares, "My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." This assurance allows us to move forward with faith, knowing that the same God who has guided us thus far will continue to lead us. Recognizing God's hand is not about understanding every detail of His plan, but about trusting that His presence is always with us. It's about seeing the divine in the ordinary, the purpose in the pain, and the blessings in the challenges. His hand is there, guiding, providing, and reminding us that we are never alone. Open your eyes, your heart, and your spirit, and you will begin to see the unmistakable evidence of His hand in your life. Fear is one of the most powerful forces that can hold us back from experiencing the fullness of God's plans for our lives. It whispers doubts into our minds, magnifies the unknown, and paralyzes us with what-ifs. Fear keeps us from taking the steps of faith that lead to growth, freedom, and fulfillment. But letting go of fear is not just an act of courage, it is an act of trust in God. When we release fear, we create space for faith, allowing God to work in ways that exceed our imagination. Throughout Scripture, we are reminded again and again not to fear. In fact, "Do not be afraid" is one of the most repeated commands in the Bible. This is not because fear is unnatural, but because fear is a universal human experience. Even the greatest heroes of faith faced moments of fear. Yet in every instance, God's response was the same, reassurance of His presence. In Isaiah 41:10, God says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Letting go of fear begins with this truth: you are not alone. God is with you, and His strength is greater than any fear you face. One of the key reasons fear grips us is our desire for control. We fear losing what we have, failing in our endeavors, or stepping into the unknown because we cannot see the outcome. But fear is often rooted in the lie that we are in control of everything. Letting go of fear requires surrendering that control to God. In 2 Timothy 1:7, we are reminded, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." Fear thrives in uncertainty, but faith thrives in surrender. When we release our need to control the outcome, we allow God's power to take over. Fear also grows when we focus on our limitations instead of God's greatness. In Exodus 3, when God calls Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses responds with fear. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Exodus 3:11. Moses focuses on his inadequacies, but God redirects him to focus on his presence, saying, "I will be with you." Exodus 3:12. This is the key to letting go of fear, shifting your focus from your weaknesses to God's strength. When you stop looking at what you cannot do and start trusting in what God can do, fear loses its power. Letting go of fear also requires confronting the lies it tells us. Fear often disguises itself as wisdom or practicality, convincing us to stay where it's safe. But fear is a liar. It tells us that we are alone, that we will fail, that the unknown is dangerous. Yet in John 8:32, Jesus says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." The truth is that God is for you, not against you. The truth is that His plans for you are good. The truth is that He has already gone before you, preparing the way. When you confront fear with the truth of God's promises, it loses its grip on your heart. Faith in the waiting also allows us to focus on the present moment. Often, in our eagerness to reach the next milestone, we miss the beauty and lessons of the now. In Matthew 6:34, Jesus reminds us, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." Each day has enough trouble of its own. Faith in the waiting teaches us to embrace today, trusting that God is already working on our tomorrows. One of the most profound aspects of waiting is that it draws us closer to God. When we surrender our timelines and plans, we open ourselves to a deeper relationship with Him. In Psalm 27:14, we are encouraged, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." Waiting is not a lonely experience, it is an opportunity to walk with God, to lean on Him, and to find peace in His presence. Lastly, faith in the waiting prepares us for the blessings to come. Often the time we spend waiting is not about the blessing itself, but about shaping us into the people who are ready to receive it. David was anointed king as a young shepherd boy, but he didn't take the throne immediately. He spent years waiting, growing, and preparing for the responsibility of leadership. By the time he became king, he was not just a warrior but a man after God's own heart, ready to lead with wisdom and faith. When we embrace faith in the waiting, we allow God to work in us and through us in ways we cannot imagine. It is not easy, but it is worth it. Waiting is not wasted time, it is sacred time, a divine process that strengthens our faith, shapes our character, and aligns our hearts with God's perfect plans. Trust the waiting, for it is where faith grows, and where the greatest surprises are prepared. Stepping into the unknown is one of the most terrifying and yet liberating acts of faith. It requires releasing the security of what is familiar and trusting that the path ahead, though uncertain, is guided by a divine purpose. The unknown is not a void to be feared, but a space where miracles unfold, where possibilities greater than your imagination take shape. To embrace the unknown is to step into the story God is writing for your life, even when you can't see the next chapter. The Bible is filled with examples of those who embraced the unknown, trusting that God's hand would lead them. Abraham, known as the father of faith, is one of the most profound examples. In Genesis 12:1, God commands him, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's house to the land I will show you." God does not reveal the destination, only a promise. Imagine the courage it took for Abraham to leave everything he knew, to walk into the unknown with nothing but faith in God's word. His journey reminds us that the unknown is not a place of abandonment, but a place of divine encounter. To embrace the unknown, we must first let go of the illusion of control. We often cling to what is predictable, even if it no longer serves us, because the unknown feels risky. But clinging to the familiar can keep us trapped in a life that is smaller than the one God intends for us. In Exodus 14, as the Israelites stood before the Red Sea, they faced a choice: return to Egypt, where they had lived as slaves, or step into the unknown, trusting that God would make a way. It was only when Moses stretched out his hand in faith that the waters parted, revealing a path to freedom. The lesson here is clear: the unknown may feel dangerous, but it is often the gateway to liberation and transformation. Embracing the unknown also requires a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing uncertainty as something to fear, we can view it as an opportunity for God to reveal His power. Consider Peter's bold act in Matthew 14, when he stepped out of the boat to walk on water toward Jesus. The sea was unpredictable, the storm raging, yet Peter trusted the voice of Jesus saying, "Come." For a moment, Peter walked on water, defying logic and fear, though he faltered when he took his eyes off Jesus. The story reminds us that the unknown is not about our strength, but about God's. When we keep our focus on Him, the impossible becomes possible. The unknown often stretches us in ways that prepare us for what's ahead. Joseph's life is a powerful illustration of this truth. Sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph endured years of uncertainty. Yet every step of his journey was part of God's plan to position him as a leader in Egypt, where he would save countless lives during a famine. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph reflects on his journey and says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done." The unknown seasons of Joseph's life were not wasted. They were preparing him for a purpose greater than he could have imagined. One of the greatest challenges of embracing the unknown is the temptation to seek guarantees before taking a step. We want assurances that the outcome will be favorable, that the risk will be worth it. But faith does not come with guarantees, it comes with trust. In Hebrews 11:1, we are reminded, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see." To embrace the unknown is to walk in confidence, not because we know what lies ahead, but because we trust the one who does. Embracing the unknown also requires courage in the face of fear. Fear whispers that the unknown is dangerous, that it's better to stay where you are. But fear is often the greatest barrier to growth. In Joshua 1:9, God encourages Joshua as he steps into the unknown task of leading the Israelites into the promised land. "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it, trusting that God's presence will sustain you. The unknown is also where God's timing is revealed. We often expect immediate answers or results, but God works in ways that unfold gradually, often in ways we don't expect. When the Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, it was not because God had abandoned them, but because He was preparing them. Deuteronomy 8:2 explains, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart." The unknown was a season of growth, a time for God to shape them into the people who could enter the promised land. Finally, embracing the unknown brings us closer to God. When we release our plans and step into uncertainty, we rely on Him in ways we never have before. Psalm 23:4 assures us, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." The unknown may feel like a valley, but it is also a place of intimacy, where we experience God's presence, guidance, and provision in profound ways. To embrace the unknown is to say, I don't know what lies ahead, but I trust the one who does. I trust that his plans are good, his timing is perfect, and his promises are true. It is an act of surrender that opens the door to transformation, growth, and blessings beyond what we could ever imagine. The unknown is not to be feared, it is to be embraced, for it is where God's greatest surprises await. Trusting God's timing is one of the most challenging yet rewarding acts of faith. In a world that thrives on instant gratification, where everything is expected to happen quickly and on demand, waiting for God's perfect timing often feels like swimming against the tide. Yet, it is in this waiting that we learn some of the most profound lessons about trust, patience, and God's sovereignty. His timing is never early, never late, but always exactly right, crafted not only for our good but for His greater purpose. The challenge of trusting God's timing often stems from our limited perspective. We see only what is immediately in front of us, while God sees the entire picture. Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Trusting God's timing means acknowledging that our understanding is finite, while His wisdom is infinite. It is choosing to believe that He is orchestrating every detail of our lives in ways we cannot yet comprehend. One of the greatest biblical examples of trusting God's timing is found in the story of Lazarus. In John 11, we read that Jesus is informed that Lazarus, whom He loves, is gravely ill. Instead of rushing to Lazarus' side, Jesus stays where he is for 2 more days. By the time he arrives, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. To those watching, it must have seemed like Jesus was late, like he had missed his chance to heal Lazarus. Yet, Jesus declares, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." John 11:4. When Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, it becomes clear that His timing was not a delay, but a demonstration of His power and purpose. This story reminds us that what feels like a delay in our eyes is often a setup for a greater blessing. Trusting God's timing requires releasing our need for control. We often create timelines and plans, expecting God to operate within them. Proverbs 16:9 tells us, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." When we insist on our own timing, we risk missing the beauty of what God is doing in His. Trusting His timing means surrendering our agendas and allowing Him to guide our steps, knowing that His plans are always for our good. Waiting for God's timing also tests our patience and strengthens our faith. In Habakkuk 2:3, the prophet writes, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time. It speaks of the end, and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it, it will certainly come and will not delay." This verse encourages us to remain steadfast, even when the waiting feels endless. It is a reminder that God's promises are certain, and that His timing, though it may linger, is never late. Patience in the waiting is not passive, it is active faith that trusts God is working behind the scenes. King David's life is another testament to the importance of trusting God's timing. Anointed as a young shepherd boy, David did not immediately ascend to the throne. Instead, he spent years serving King Saul, fleeing for his life and enduring trials that must have tested his faith. Yet, through it all, David trusted God's timing. In Psalm 27:14, he writes, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord." When David finally became king, it was clear that the years of waiting had prepared him to lead with wisdom, humility, and a heart aligned with God's will. Trusting God's timing also requires us to redefine what success and progress look like. In our culture, we are often measured by how quickly we achieve our goals or reach milestones. But God is more interested in our transformation than our speed. In Ecclesiastes 3:1, we are reminded, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens." Seasons of waiting are not wasted, they are times of preparation, pruning, and growth. They shape us into the people we need to be to step into the blessings and responsibilities God has prepared for us. Have you ever felt like your life is stuck in a place of uncertainty, where no matter how hard you try, things just don't seem to fall into place? Maybe you've wrestled with questions that seem to have no answers, carried burdens too heavy to bear, or struggled with the quiet ache of waiting for change, waiting for purpose, waiting for a sign. And yet in those quiet, restless moments, there's a whisper deep within, calling you to let go. What if I told you that the answers you seek, the breakthroughs you long for, are not found in your striving but in your surrender? It's not the kind of surrender that feels like defeat or resignation. No, this is a holy surrender, a trust so profound that it lifts you out of your weariness and places you in the arms of the one who sees what you cannot see. But surrendering to God is not easy. It feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, uncertain if you'll fall or soar. It feels like releasing control when every instinct tells you to hold on tighter. It feels like saying yes to the unknown, not because you're fearless, but because you've come to realize that your own strength is no longer enough. Think of the moments in your life when everything seemed hopeless, yet something or someone brought you through. Were those coincidences? Or were they glimpses of a greater hand at work, guiding you even when you didn't understand? Surrender is not about giving up, it's about giving into something greater. It's the act of saying, I cannot do this on my own, but I trust you can. And here's the part that so many miss. When you truly surrender to God, He doesn't just meet your expectations, He exceeds them. He surprises you in ways you could never imagine, weaving beauty out of chaos, purpose out of pain, and joy out of despair. The path to surrender is not without its struggles. It's a journey that requires faith, patience, and the courage to let go of what you think your life should look like. But the rewards are beyond anything you can comprehend. Because when you surrender, you make room for the divine to move. You open the door for miracles, for blessings you didn't even know you needed, and for a peace that surpasses all understanding. What if today, right now, was the moment you decided to stop fighting and start trusting? What if your surrender was the key to unlocking the surprises God has in store for you? Let's journey together into this sacred act of surrender. Let's explore the signs that God is asking you to let go, the beauty that awaits when you do, and the unshakable promise that His plans for you are good. Because one thing is certain, when you surrender to God, He will surprise you sooner than you think. Letting go of control is one of the hardest yet most liberating acts we can ever experience. From the moment we are born, we learn to grasp for attention, for security, for success. We are taught to believe that control is power, that the more tightly we hold onto things, the more secure and fulfilled we will be. But here lies the paradox: the tighter we cling to control, the more burdened and restless we become. True freedom is not found in holding on, it is found in letting go. The act of letting go is not an admission of defeat, but a declaration of trust. It is saying to God, I don't have all the answers, and I don't need to, because I trust you do. It is releasing your grip on the wheel and allowing the divine to steer. This is not passive resignation, it is active surrender, a bold step of faith that acknowledges that God's plans for you are far greater than anything you could imagine for yourself. Imagine trying to hold a handful of sand. The more you tighten your grip, the more the grains slip through your fingers. But when you open your hand, the sand rests there peacefully. Life is much the same. The things we try to control, our careers, relationships, finances, even our future, often slip away when we clutch them too tightly. But when we release them to God, they find their rightful place, not through our striving, but through His grace. Letting go of control often begins with a moment of recognition, a realization that your way isn't working. Perhaps you've tried everything to make things go your way, but instead of peace, you found exhaustion. This is the moment when you can choose to cling harder or to release everything into God's hands. It is not a sign of weakness to admit you cannot do it alone. It is a sign of wisdom. Even the strongest among us reach a point where we must admit, I need help beyond myself. In Proverbs 3:5-6 we are reminded, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." This is not a call to abandon your dreams or goals, it is an invitation to trust God with them. Letting go of control doesn't mean you stop working hard or stop planning. It means you release the need to control the outcome and trust that God is orchestrating every detail in ways you may not yet see. But letting go is not easy. It requires confronting our fears, especially the fear of uncertainty. We often hold on to control because we believe that if we let go, things might fall apart. We fear the unknown, the what-ifs that linger in the back of our minds. But what if the unknown is not a void to be feared, but a canvas for God to paint his masterpiece? What if letting go of control is not about losing security, but about stepping into a greater security found in him? Think of Peter walking on water in Matthew 14. When Jesus called Peter out of the boat, Peter had to let go of the security of the boat, the one thing keeping him afloat in the storm. He stepped out, not because the water suddenly became solid, but because he trusted the one who called him. Letting go of control feels much the same. It's stepping into the unknown, trusting not in the absence of fear, but in the presence of God. Letting go of control also requires humility. It is a reminder that we are not the center of the universe, that we are part of a greater story written by a hand far wiser than ours. In Isaiah 55:8-9, God declares, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." To let go of control is to accept that our perspective is limited and that God's perspective is infinite. It is recognizing that we see only a small piece of the puzzle while he sees the whole picture. This surrender is not a one-time event, it is a daily choice. Each day we are faced with opportunities to either cling to our plans or release them to God. It could be a difficult decision at work, a relationship that isn't going as expected, or a dream that seems delayed. In each moment, letting go means saying, "God, I trust you with this. I trust that you know what's best, even when I don't understand." The act of letting go also transforms how we see setbacks. When we try to control everything, obstacles feel like failures, and delays feel like defeat. But when we surrender to God, we begin to see these moments as part of his divine plan. What looks like a closed door may actually be a redirection to something greater. What feels like a detour may be a path leading to blessings we couldn't have imagined. Letting go of control also lightens your soul. When you stop carrying the weight of trying to control everything, you make space for peace. Jesus himself invites us in Matthew 11:28-30. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Letting go allows you to exchange the heavy burden of control for the light yoke of trust. To let go of control is to say, "I believe that God is good, even when I don't understand. I believe that he is faithful, even when I don't see the outcome yet. I believe that his plans for me are good, even when mine don't work out." It is this kind of surrender that opens the door for God to move in your life in ways you never thought possible. It is this kind of trust that sets the stage for his divine surprises. Letting go is not the end of your story, it is the beginning of a greater chapter, one where God takes what you've released and turns it into something far beyond what you could have controlled. Trust him with your life and watch as he does more than you could ever ask or imagine. Waiting can feel like one of the most difficult challenges in life. It's a space where time seems to slow and answers feel just out of reach. In these moments of waiting, it's easy to become restless, discouraged, or even doubtful. We ask ourselves, why hasn't it happened yet? Am I doing something wrong? Has God forgotten about me? But the truth is, waiting is not a punishment, it is a divine process. It is the fertile ground where faith takes root and grows. When God asks you to wait, he is not withholding, he is preparing. Faith in the waiting is not about passively standing still. It's about trusting in God's timing, even when you don't understand it. It's about believing that his delays are not denials but redirections and refinements. Think of the farmer who plants seeds in the soil. The farmer cannot force the crops to grow overnight. Instead, he trusts the process, watering the soil, nurturing the land, and waiting patiently for the harvest. Waiting on God is much the same. It requires faith that what has been planted in your life will bloom at the right time, even if you cannot yet see the growth beneath the surface. In the Bible, some of the greatest stories of faith were born in seasons of waiting. Abraham and Sarah waited decades for the fulfillment of God's promise that they would have a son. Imagine their frustration, their questions, their moments of doubt as the years passed without any sign of change. And yet, in Genesis 21:1-2, we read that the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Isaac was born, not according to Abraham and Sarah's timing, but in God's perfect time. Their waiting was not wasted, it was a season of preparation, a test of faith that strengthened their trust in God's promises. Faith in the waiting also transforms how we view delays. What may seem like a setback to us is often a setup for something greater. Consider the story of Joseph. After being sold into slavery by his brothers, he spent years in Egypt as a servant and then a prisoner. It must have felt like God's plans for his life had been derailed. But in Genesis 50:20, Joseph looks back on his journey and says to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." The years Joseph spent waiting were not wasted, they were part of a divine plan to prepare him for a position of influence and leadership. Waiting requires patience, and patience is a fruit of faith. James 5:7-8 encourages us, "Be patient, then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming." See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Faith in the waiting is not about idly passing time. It is about standing firm, believing that God's timing is never early and never late. But faith in the waiting also requires surrender. When we wait, we are tempted to take matters into our own hands, to force outcomes or to create shortcuts. Yet these attempts often lead to frustration and disappointment. In Exodus 32, we see the Israelites grow impatient as they wait for Moses to return from Mount Sinai. In their impatience, they create a golden calf to worship, a decision that leads to devastating consequences. This story is a cautionary tale, reminding us that impatience can lead us away from God's plans, while faith keeps us aligned with His purpose. Waiting is also a time of growth and refinement. In Isaiah 40:31, we are promised, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, they will run and not grow weary, they will walk and not be faint." This renewal of strength often comes during the waiting. It is in these seasons that God shapes our character, builds our endurance, and deepens our faith. Waiting is not passive, it is active trust in God's process. Fear often appears strongest in the face of the unknown. We fear what we cannot see or predict, but God calls us to trust Him in the uncertainty. In Joshua 1:9, as Joshua prepares to lead the Israelites into the promised land, God says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Letting go of fear means choosing courage. Not because the path is easy, but because God is with you. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward despite it, trusting in God's presence. One of the most powerful ways to let go of fear is through prayer. Philippians 4:6-7 teaches us, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." When we bring our fears to God in prayer, we exchange anxiety for peace. Prayer reminds us that we are not fighting our battles alone, we are inviting the Creator of the universe to fight on our behalf. Letting go of fear also requires remembering God's faithfulness in the past. In Deuteronomy 31:8, Moses encourages the Israelites, saying, "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged." The Israelites had seen God's hand at work parting the Red Sea, providing manna in the wilderness, defeating their enemies. These reminders of God's past faithfulness gave them courage to face the future. In the same way, when you remember how God has been faithful in your own life, you can trust Him with what lies ahead. Finally, letting go of fear opens the door for God to move in miraculous ways. When Peter stepped out of the boat in Matthew 14, walking on water toward Jesus, he was doing something humanly impossible. Fear crept in when Peter took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the waves, causing him to sink. But even then, Jesus reached out and caught him, saying, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" This story reminds us that fear may cause us to falter, but God's hand is always there to lift us up. Letting go of fear is not about never feeling afraid, it's about choosing to trust God more than your fear. When we let go of fear, we create space for faith, courage, and peace to take root in our lives. Fear may shout loudly, but God's voice is louder. Trust in His presence, rely on His promises, and watch as fear fades in the light of His power. Letting go of fear is not just about finding freedom, it's about stepping into the life God has planned for you, a life marked by boldness, purpose, and unshakable trust in Him. One of the most exhilarating yet challenging aspects of surrendering to God is learning to prepare for the unexpected. When you truly let go and trust Him, life takes on a new rhythm, one that isn't predictable by human standards, but is guided by divine wisdom. God often works in ways that defy logic, unfolding blessings and opportunities that surpass our understanding. To prepare for the unexpected is to embrace a mindset of faith, adaptability, and readiness for the miraculous. Throughout Scripture, we see countless examples of God working in unexpected ways. Consider the story of Mary, a young woman living an ordinary life in a small town. When an angel appeared to her with the most extraordinary news, she would give birth to the Messiah. In Luke 1:38, Mary responds with profound faith, "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." Mary had no way of fully understanding what this divine plan would mean for her life, yet she prepared her heart to trust God completely. Her story reminds us that the unexpected is often God's way of inviting us into something far greater than we could have imagined. Preparing for the unexpected begins with an open heart and a willingness to release your expectations. We often approach life with a narrow view of what should happen, clinging to our plans as if they are the only way forward. But Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." To prepare for the unexpected, you must first acknowledge that God's plans far exceed your own, and that His ways, though sometimes mysterious, are always good. The unexpected often arrives in moments of disruption. Joseph, sold into slavery by his brothers and later imprisoned on false charges, could have easily believed his life was a series of misfortunes. Yet, in Genesis 50:20, he reflects on his journey and says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." The disruptions in Joseph's life were not random, they were part of God's divine plan to position him as a leader who would save countless lives. In the same way, the unexpected disruptions in your life may be God's way of redirecting you toward a purpose you cannot yet see. Faith is the foundation of preparing for the unexpected. In Hebrews 11:1, we are reminded, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see." Faith allows you to step forward, even when the path ahead is unclear. It gives you the courage to trust that what feels uncertain to you is already known and planned by God. The unexpected may catch you off guard, but it never catches him off guard. Faith shifts your perspective, enabling you to see the unexpected not as chaos but as opportunity. Preparing for the unexpected also requires adaptability. When Jesus called his first disciples, he didn't give them a detailed plan or a timeline. Instead, he simply said, "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people," Matthew 4:19. The disciples left their nets and their livelihoods to follow him into an unknown future. They didn't know what lay ahead, but their willingness to adapt to the call transformed their lives and the world. God's plans often require us to let go of what is familiar and comfortable, embracing the changes he brings with faith and flexibility. The unexpected often carries with it blessings we could never have anticipated. In Ephesians 3:20, we are assured that God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. This promise reminds us that God's surprises are not just unexpected, they are abundant. He doesn't just meet our needs, he exceeds them. To prepare for the unexpected is to remain open to the possibility that God's plans are far greater than your dreams. One way to prepare for the unexpected is to cultivate a spirit of gratitude and trust. Gratitude shifts your focus from fear to faith, reminding you of God's faithfulness in the past. When you reflect on how he has worked in your life before, you can trust that he will continue to work in ways that are for your good. In Philippians 4:6-7, Paul writes, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Gratitude prepares your heart to receive the unexpected with joy and trust. The unexpected also reveals God's sovereignty. In Proverbs 16:9 we read, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." This verse reminds us that while we may make plans, it is ultimately God who directs our lives. When the unexpected happens, it is an opportunity to lean into his sovereignty and trust that he is guiding you exactly where you need to be. It is a reminder that your life is not random but is part of a divine narrative written by a loving and all-knowing God. Finally, preparing for the unexpected invites us to walk in hope. The unexpected can be unsettling, but it is also filled with the potential for transformation and growth. In Jeremiah 29:11, God promises, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." This promise assures us that even when life takes an unexpected turn, God's plans are always good. He is not only present in the unexpected, he is actively working through it to fulfill his purpose for your life. Preparing for the unexpected is not about having all the answers, it is about trusting the one who does. It is about opening your heart to the possibilities that God is weaving into your story, even when they look different from what you envisioned. When you embrace the unexpected with faith, adaptability, and hope, you position yourself to experience the fullness of God's blessings and the beauty of his plans. Stay ready, stay open, and watch as God surprises you in ways that will leave you in awe. When you surrender to God, you step into a story far greater than the one you could write for yourself. Each act of surrender, letting go of control, trusting his timing, embracing the unknown, and releasing fear draws you closer to the life he has prepared for you. Along the way, his hand guides you, his strength upholds you, and his timing aligns perfectly to reveal blessings beyond what you could ever imagine. The unexpected will not only challenge you but transform you, showing you that his plans are always for your good and his glory. Surrender is not a sign of weakness but an act of faith. It is trusting that the one who created the universe holds your life in his hands, and that his plans are greater, his love deeper, and his promises unshakable. When you let go and allow him to lead, you will see doors open that you never thought possible, paths cleared that seemed impassable, and a peace that transcends all understanding. God will surprise you. He will move in ways that defy logic and understanding, and He will exceed your greatest expectations. Your surrender invites His miracles, and your trust unlocks His blessings. The key is to stay faithful, stay open, and stay willing to let Him work in His way and His time. As you move forward from this moment, let this be your prayer: Lord, I surrender my plans, my fears, my desires, and my timing to You. I trust that You are working all things for my good. Surprise me with Your grace, Your power, and Your divine provision. Lead me into the life You've called me to live. Thank you for joining me on this journey of surrender and trust. If this message has touched your heart, please like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more powerful and faith-filled content, and don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a moment of inspiration. Let's walk this path together, trusting that God's plans are always good and His surprises are always worth the wait. Until next time, may you find strength in your surrender and joy in the unexpected blessings to come. Keep shining, stay faithful, and remember God is always working, even when you cannot see it. God bless you.